With a disgraced new American president set to be inaugurated in January, Keir Starmer appears to have decided it's time for us to send a new disgraced ambassador across the Atlantic. Yes, Peter Mandelson has been confirmed as Britain's next ambassador in Washington. Despite some inside Britain's Foreign Office allegedly urging the Prime Minister to stick with current US Ambassador Dame Karen Pierce, known in some quarters as the Trump Whisperer, Starmer's allies say he ultimately believed the case was overwhelming for picking Mandy, particularly given his experience in trade issues from his time as an EU commissioner. Mandelson is, of course, also a famed media operator, a minister under Blair and Brown. He was before that Labour's communications chief in the 1980s when he became known as the Prince of Darkness. He can do Fox News and the other TV channels, and that's a big part of the job, a source close to the process told the Financial Times. And of course, that isn't to say he comes without baggage, to say the least. Mandelson had to resign from the cabinet not once, but twice during the Blair years, and he hasn't said the most savoury things about Trump himself, so the person he's going to have to make a relationship with. In 2019, Mandelson went on the podcast of Elaine Elkin, an Italian journalist, and described Trump as a danger to the world and little short of a white nationalist and racist. But it's his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein that now makes Mandelson especially controversial. The closeness of that relationship was explored in a recent documentary on Channel 4.
Epstein was free to continue to conduct business as usual, and our source says he witnessed an intriguing phone call.
While I was there, he received a call and said, "Hello, Petey." And he chatted away. And Petey wanted to meet Jamie Dimon, who was then the chairman of JP Morgan. And by the time he said, "Yes, I'll sort it out," put the phone down, and Petey turned out to be none other than the Secretary of the Board of Trade, Peter Mandelson. I was astonished that a British cabinet minister at that time, probably the most powerful man other than the Prime Minister, was calling Jeffrey in jail to make an appointment or to seek an appointment with a very powerful banker in New York.
In 2005, Peter Mandelson had been snapped casually shopping with Epstein in the US Virgin Islands.
But I think it demonstrated that as far as Jeffrey was concerned, life was carrying on as if nothing had happened.
And the phone call worked?
Yeah, no, it was sorted out.
Did you get a sense from him how well he knew Peter Mandelson?
Well, clearly you don't call Peter Mandelson Petey if you're not a close friend.
In a statement for this programme, lawyers for Lord Mandelson said,
"Our client has no recollection of a telephone conversation with Mr. Epstein in January 2009, in which he allegedly requested that Mr. Epstein set up a meeting with Jamie Dimon, chairman and CEO of JP Morgan. Our client would have no need whatsoever to make such a request. As business secretary, he met or talked on the phone to bank CEOs on a regular basis, including Mr. Dimon. These contacts were all arranged through his government office."
Of course, there are also multiple pictures of Donald Trump with Epstein, and Donald Trump has himself been subject to a slew of allegations of sexual assault, some upheld in court. So perhaps, one might think, Mandelson's apparent comfort in the presence of sex offenders could prove to be a positive in terms of British influence in the United States. Well, Trump world seems to disagree. Trump's allies have already been hitting back. Chris Lasevita wrote this on Twitter. "The UK government is special. Replace a professional university-educated ambassador with an absolute moron. He should stay home. Sad." Mandelson described Trump as a danger to the world and little short of a white nationalist. You can see how the people around Donald Trump just imitate how he tweets, which is a bit sad itself, I think. In case you haven't heard of Lasevita, he is a big deal in US conservative circles. He was a senior advisor on Donald Trump's 2024 presidential campaign, but is also the chief operating officer of the Republican National Committee. So one might assume those comments could have some sway among those around the president-elect. Aaron, what do you make of this decision, sending Peter Mandelson to Washington?
Petey. Michael, whatever happened to decency in politics? Do you remember that? Do you remember Keir Starmer telling off the Tories on a daily basis? We need to bring back decency. Is it decency to have had to resign from cabinet twice for corruption scandals? Is it decency to call a paedophile when they're in prison in order to get the number and the contact details of the CEO of Goldman Sachs? Is that decency?
He's not. It's not decency, Aaron. That's my answer for you. We're doing panto here.
Good. Well, I'm glad we've established it's the season, Michael. I'm glad we've established that. So look, for years, for 18 months, we were sadly subject to these daily, volleys, these verbal volleys from Keir Starmer and the Labour shadow cabinet. We're going to bring back integrity and decency. Do you remember this one? Country before party. Decency, country before party. So I'm going to make a party apparatchik who's been working in the Labour Party since the 1980s, is very much a party man. I'm going to make this person, who, by the way, also calls paedophiles, the world's most famous paedophile in prison. I'm going to make that person the ambassador to the world's most powerful country. Does that sound like country before party to you? Does that sound like decency and public office to you? No, of course it's not. Labour are full of crap. Keir Starmer is full of crap. And look, for people out there who say, well, all politicians are the same, that's a line that is completely unhelpful. I agree with you, by the way. But on this stuff, Keir Starmer is literally no different to Boris Johnson. In fact, from what I understand, this is the first political appointment to the US ambassador in 50 years, which is to say that when Boris Johnson, and when his Conservative predecessors made this appointment, they generally drew upon the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. They generally went along with the normal protocol. Keir Starmer, by contrast, has selected somebody who is a party man, a party loyalist, who will answer to him, but also, more importantly, who will answer to his advisors, people like Morgan McSweeney. That is the opposite. That is the antithesis of country before party. Boris Johnson, in selecting for the US ambassador to the UK, the Tories in selecting for the US ambassador, the UK ambassador to the US, they were selecting more for country before party than Keir Starmer is. It's almost like these accusations that he was throwing against the Tories were actually somewhat directed at himself. You know what they say, Michael? When you point the finger at someone, three are coming right back at you. And I feel that really captures Keir Starmer and his exercise on decency.
Is that something about Keir Starmer, or do you think it's just stupid for politicians to ever make decency their pitch, because sort of politics is inherently a dirty game?
I really think you're letting him up. So look, you might be watching this, you might think this, Michael. You might be listening to this. I think typical Aaron, he's putting the boot in with Keir Starmer. As I've said, this has the idea of a political appointment for UK ambassador to the US hasn't happened in 50 years. It's very unusual. This is deeply, deeply unusual. So the idea that this is just business as usual, this is what politicians do. No, actually. And also, let's remember, Michael, since he left public office, he was a lord and a very senior member of the cabinet under Gordon Brown. He's basically been in the world of interest representation, lobbying, global council. He started it. Okay, it was his thing, basically selling political influence. We've now made an arch lobbyist this country's ambassador to the US. Okay, so we've got so many things going on here, Michael. Keir Starmer, country before party, decency. Oh, and by the way, we're not going to give lobbyists loads of power. Those days are over. It's the complete converse to all the things he was promising. So it's not business as usual. This is deeply unhealthy. And if the Conservative Party had a man who was a lobbyist, who was involved in a business with the kinds of influence and power that Global Council does, who was on first name terms with so many billionaires, including Russian ones. By the way, he said those things about Donald Trump on that podcast to the divorced husband of a lady who's basically the most powerful family in Italy, the Agnellis. That man who hosts the podcast is the father of Lapo Elkan, who is, he's one of the doyens of Italian civil society. So even when he speaks to journalists and podcasts, Michael, it's to millionaires. That's Peter Mandelson. So you have somebody with that kind of profile, these interests, that history. Like I say, he had to resign twice from cabinet. He calls a paedophile in prison to get the details of somebody who might be useful to him. If this was a Conservative, Michael, imagine if this was a Conservative and a Conservative PM, Boris Johnson or Theresa May, whoever, David Cameron, made him this country's ambassador to the US. How do you think The Guardian would respond? Be honest. How do you think the BBC would respond? Be honest. I've seen John Sopel on X saying this is a great, clever decision. I can't remember the exact formulation of words, something to that effect. Right decision, good decision. How do you think John Sopel would have responded if that exact same set of characteristics, that history, that CV, had been applied to a conservative person and he was made the ambassador to the US? I suspect he would have had a rather different response. What do I know?